Hello and welcome to another in a series of interviews we're doing with the economic spokespersons for the various political parties. I'm Eric Whitberg, and today I'm joined by Shane Jones of the New Zealand First Party, the economic spokesperson. Shane, kia ora and welcome.
Kia ora, folks. Nice to be here.
Shane, what would be the core of your economic philosophy? Is there a particular principle that you think should override and inform all major economic decisions?
Pro-growth. It's our view that the country is suffused and surrounded by an anti-growth ideology. We're of the view that successive governments have allowed legislation, regulatory creep. It's not entirely fair to blame any particular regime. We've sought to use regulation to boost a sense of well-being, but it's had the effect of undermining productivity. Whether I look at the aquaculture sector, the horticulture sector, the broader primary produce sector, the infrastructure sector, and I think one of the chronic deficiencies that we as Kiwis now have is the nadir of productivity.
So you would be an economic realist. You would regard some people as very much not so, and you'd want to shift the dial a bit, I guess.
Yeah, if you look at a number of the speeches that our leader Winston Peters has given over the last 18 months, it's very much driven by a heightened sense of realism as to what is our actual position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. But more importantly, we were quite alarmed by the pre-fu numbers. Consequently, we were pulled back on any more major announcements, such as what we originally were keen to proceed with, until we get a better sense. And that probably won't come until after the election. But we have identified for a long time, and if I just talk about three tax things, the importance of adjusting our tax brackets to deal with the burglary-like effects of inflation. Secondly, we've always been a supporter of a handsome depreciation schedule to drive productivity and capital formation and capital upgrade. And obviously, at our recent party conference, our leader identified the exemption of GST from a core range of food types. Now, and I'm about to stop here.
Yes.
Now, this has been shanghaied somewhat until such time we've got a very good understanding, less about what's in the kitty, what are we on the hook for going forward, which is why our leader is very keen to proceed with a budget within the first 100 days.
So on GST, on some core items, such as presumably food, are you pulling back on that until you know more about the numbers?
No, well, obviously we announced it to great fanfare at our party conference, but I think it's fair that all the parties, whilst we're campaigning on these matters, it's probably not credible to say as to what shape and final form and over what time such relief would be delivered. And the most responsible thing to do would be to undertake a deep dive into our fiscals and to establish, number one, are we generating value for money? Number two, of the money that's currently being deployed, can it be used in a different way? Or do we have to do what most households in Northland are doing, which is trimming the sails and living within a more modest budget?
Okay, then, with regard to this idea of you being very careful and thoughtful before you do anything, how would you characterise then the Labour Party's decision to go ahead with cutting GST on fruit and vegetables as a matter of course? It's happening anyway.
Yeah, I'm not across all the details as to what Chippy, the Prime Minister, has been announcing, although I did hear him make some fairly reckless commitments during the recent debate. But then in fairness to him, Christopher Luxon is as well. And look, I just want to remind everyone, our core Crown expenditure is 140 billion a year, more or less. when we left town in 2020, we were meant to be spending 116 billion in 2024. Well, it's gone up 24 billion, which is why I said there's 140 billion on the dial next year. And that's
Is that too much? Is that too much?
Well, it's $24 billion over a 3 or 4 year period. I'd want to know where on earth has that money gone? Because everywhere I look in the north, so many things seem to be failing, whether it's the delivery of essential services, continual queries and worries about law and order, and perhaps we're an egregious case with the nature of our topography up here, but our roads are failing as well.
So has that money not been spent well?
Well, I've felt that for a long time, that over the last 3 years, and indeed I've written about it at each of the budgets, not only has the funding not been targeted, but there's no accountability and there doesn't seem to be any sharp oversight. In days of yore, you had a great level of confidence that you could boot the bureaucracy along and you could justify the quality of the result. I think, Eric, one of the most saddest things I saw when I was a minister was we agreed with Jacinda to announce, I think it was $1.9 billion worth of mental health funding. And that's a stupendous amount of money. And obviously there's a great need amongst our respective communities, or all communities. And mate, I have done a deep dive and I'm begging if I can find out what on earth society or New Zealand bought for that 1.9 billion. And indeed, the Auditor General had a similar experience. Now, I'm not being capricious raising this, but I think it's indicative of a problem that politicians now have. We have ended up being led by the nose too often by the bureaucracy. And when it comes time to justify to the public what's been the outcome, we're scrambling or floundering.
If you are being reserved about what you will do because you want to look closer at just what the books are like and you're worried about what they're like, how do you feel about the National Party's plans for tax adjustments?
Well, I can say nothing better than what Winston has said, that obviously there is a case for relief for taxpayers, but neither he or I have seen their background workings, the underlying arithmetic. And there's three things I want to raise about their tax proposed regime, Eric. Number one, it involves raiding the ETS revenue. And that ETS revenue depends on a credible ETS system, which is quite in a perilous situation at the moment. Secondly, it involves bringing the next 3 years into the first year of the effects of a tax adjustment in terms of dealing with the inflationary impact on tax brackets. So they're bringing 3 years into the first 1 year. And the last thing I would remind your viewers of is that there's something deeply malevolent about a belief that the only way you can make progress in the New Zealand economy is to exempt rich foreigners and enable them to come and buy our property. Now, that will have an inflationary impact on the value of property, because if your place is 1.6, 1.7, it's just human nature. You're going to bump it up to $2 million. So you can get a rich person. So, I mean, until we have those three questions answered, and I haven't seen the information, and I know our leader hasn't, it's unrealistic to expect New Zealand First to acquiesce or sign off on that tax play.
Do you agree in principle with combating bracket creep with maybe having taxation indexed to inflation or wage inflation?
Yes, that's been a New Zealand First policy for a long time now. I was just surprised that that indexation is being front-loaded into the first year, if you look closely at the tax regime that Christopher Luxon's keen to bring in.
I see. So, so it's been your policy for a while, but you think the actual details of the National Party plan need another look at before they go ahead.
Yeah, I think most free-thinking Kiwis realise that there are a host of look. It's like a net that hasn't been either made well the first time round, or it's already frayed and it hasn't caught many fish. And the other thing I'd bear in mind is that We've got to grow the economy. So will these tax changes enable investors, entrepreneurs, risk takers to actually grow the economy? In the absence of us growing our exports with their goods or services, how are we going to overcome the current account deficit drama? And I don't see another way, mate, unless we commit at the pith of our philosophy going forward, pro-growth ideology. And that's going to require us revising at what pace and at what direction do we head in terms of meeting these decarbonisation targets.
Okay, now getting back to the question of growth, you have said in the past, I think, that you're in favour of more mining, for example, and you want to renew the drilling for gas because you think presumably it's needed for the economy.
Yeah, now look, I know these are awkward topics for a lot of political participants, but I want to say the following. We've waited 3 years for a distillation of an energy strategy at the top of the government. And we've waited 3 years for a clear plan showing us how this decarbonisation in the energy context is going to be affected. What role is there for ongoing reliance on fossil fuel? What role will gas play? At what point will wind, will solar, possibly more hydro, or possibly more geothermal? We have none of that. We have a lot of bumper stickers, we have a lot of slogans, we have a lot of policy seances. So on the question of economic policy, and from my perspective, energy lies at the heart of it, which is why we want a standalone energy agency. And working with industry, we want to be able to distill a clear, navigable plan showing what the nation needs to do, not only to cope with the security risk associated with energy, but how we're going to cost it. Now, I've sat next to Megan, and I've challenged both her and other participants. There is no clear plan, and I'm astounded with all the vocabulary and all the rhetoric we've used over the pursuit of climate change outcomes. There's not even a single place in the state where you could find a plan.
Do you think the cabinet just isn't organised or getting it together properly or setting things out in an organised way, or what?
Oh, well, number one, we need a standard. We need a single agency that is an authoritative source of information, direction, and reassurance over energy policy. The party's already agreed that we need to review the Bradford reforms. There is a gross misbalance between the rights of consumers and the ongoing profiteering of the owners of our generators.
All right.
We also want to...
Can I say, interrupt there? Overall, you're wanting growth. You're wanting more production of goods like mines and from mines and things like that to improve the well-being of the New Zealand people. How would this benefit Maori people, given that their social indicators are often quite poor? Not universally, but on average. Yeah.
Well, you raise a very good point. We've got an enormous amount of work to do to narrow that gap. It's not only mining, however, aquaculture. I was astounded that Ngaitahu, the South Island Maori tribe, who are rapidly seeking opportunities to advance the interests of their lot down there, they were prevented from establishing a marine fish farm off the coast of I think the southern area of the Stewart Island, an area where no Kiwi hardly ever goes, and they've been prohibited from doing it. They probably blew $2 to $3 million getting nowhere. It's that small example epitomizes everything that's wrong with the pro-growth ideology. And in those sorts of cases, as is the case with the Whakatohea, a Podiki-based mussel enterprise, that does generate local regional jobs. That does unlock and provide an opportunity for integration between Maori capital, Maori risk-taking, and the bounty of Mother Nature. And we need to marry the two, because that's what's made money in the past.
So the anti-growth agenda is actually anti-Maori as well?
Well, in the sense of enabling Maori to look after themselves, use their own money. I mean, I need look no further, mate. Well, you're getting me started here. I need look no further, Eric, than the imbroglio around trying to harvest, store water to enable greater productivity to be unleashed from land. The red tape associated with water storage beggars belief, and it actually defeats people from wanting to even begin the process. Now, you might say, oh, well, there's a deeper question, Shane. There are some outstanding proprietary interests that Maori may very well have in water. I'm not going to spend one iota of my energy over the next 3 years pursuing that. I'm about providing water to land for any young Kiwi or any enterprise that believes they can create greater value out of that land. Now, that's just a small example. Unless we do that, how are we going to generate the export receipts to pay our way?
Okay, with regard to the pro-growth agenda, how does that fit in with the need to combat climate change?
So I'm a doubting Thomas about all the shrillness and hysteria surrounding climate change. A La Nina has gone. It's potentially taking away the rain that we've seen in the north, and El Nino is on its way, so we're about to go into a drought. And I'm a firm believer, as Winston has referred to, we cannot meet the costs of weather volatility, changing climate in New Zealand, unless we are generating an economic surplus. At the moment, climate change has been weaponized to a point that if you have a different view, i.e. focus on adaptation before mitigation, there's a strong prejudicial influence that comes in the direction of people like myself, and you feel that you're almost being cancelled. That doesn't bother me. I'll never, ever be cancelled. So I just think a lot of what's passed for climate change policy in New Zealand and the various work streams, Eric, that are taking place as we speak, all of that will need to be paused to ensure that it is not hobbling or undermining the pro-growth ideology, because if we don't have that, we are not going to recover our economic robustness.
A couple of specific questions. Do you have a view on the dual mandate of the Reserve Bank in inflation and unemployment? Do you have a view on that?
So you may recall that was a subject of discussion and debate when the Jacinda Ardern government was formed with New Zealand First. And I think any changes to the personnel and the leadership of the Reserve Bank, as Winston has said, that would be a matter our caucus would grip after the next election. I do think, however, that we need a Reserve Bank, less the governor, we need a mix of skill in there that understands two things: how you manage this inflationary situation we're in such a way that we don't race off, as New Zealand's tended to do in the past, and try and win international first prizes for busting inflation. And I'm a great believer, mate, in looking closely at what the Aussies are doing. After all, according to my statistical analysis, virtually 1 in 5 people who call themselves Maori now live in Australia. And I don't want to see our Reserve Bank heading off in any inflation busting trajectory that is not based not only in a good understanding of what the New Zealand economy can stand, but the suffering level of Kiwis.
Would you like government deficits and the government debt to come down to a reasonable level, maybe 30% or something like that, and stay there? Is that an optimal level and you wouldn't want it to go any higher?
Well, obviously, we'll agree on what is an optimal level after we've got our hands around the throat of the fiscals. But there's always going to be a rainy day, Eric, for New Zealand, whether it's our earthquake-prone character, whether it's the international challenges that are thrown at us. And I think it's really important that there's various ways you can change the ratio of your debt to GDP. You can either shrink the quantum of that deficit or that debt, or you can grow your economy. Now, you might say, well, inflation and immigration will naturally grow the economy. Immigration, in my view, has become unhinged, and we're going to have so many people over the next year or 18 months in New Zealand at a time where our infrastructure, our hospitals, and other key social services are struggling to cope. Now, I get some fairly medieval stories from my friends in the Indian community as to how they're having to offer a great deal of help and assistance, because far too many young men have come to New Zealand under false pretenses, and their situation is very dire.
It is indeed. Housing affordability, what do you think of that?
Well, probably an area of further disappointment. We endeavoured to sell to Phil Twyford in 2018 the notion that what the Crown should do is provide long-term bonds and just underwrite the development of the infrastructure. Just go and do it. He had about 100 different working parties going, and a number of us lost sight of where Labour was going on housing, to be honest with you. But if I go back to the pith of the issue, the land is there. What has been missing are the pipes, the utilities, and you're unrealistic expecting the Fletchers of the world to solely bear the cost of all that infrastructure. And we felt that if that infrastructure had been funded by the Crown and then private sector developers came along behind, it would have been a better marriage than what we ended up with. But I'll tell you one thing that we're deeply, deeply cynical about, and that's Kāinga Ora. We think that the Kāinga Ora construction and building division is not only profligate, but it is imperiling the actual solvency now of Kāinga Ora. And I need to say no more than the fact that if the market can develop something for $3,300, $500 a square meter, which itself is too high, then Kāinga Ora are up at $6,500, $6,800 a square meter. It is not only intolerable, it is not sustainable. And both the leader and I are adamant after the election, in the event we're privileged, number one, to get back to Parliament and invited to be part of a government, then the future role of Kāinga Ora will be fair and square in our line of sight, but in particular, a deep dive into the conduct, the culture, and the stewardship of the money in their building and construction division. We've heard some horror stories from there, mate. And there was I think a sense that that entity could be transformed into some sort of big transformer, if I can borrow a Hollywood image, that was going to completely rewrite how the building sector in New Zealand functions. Well, it's failed miserably. And we are of the view that the exemption of the 30 square meter cabin for building purposes should be enlarged to at least 60 square meters, and that would provide instant relief for a lot of rural Maori communities. It would provide additional housing for the 1 in 5 New Zealanders that are over the age of 60. There's a host of people in that age group who don't own their own home. And that represents a very simple and I think quite a robust alternative. So we're into very sensible and sort of common sense ideas in that regard. Please spare us from any more policy seances that we saw with Phil Twyford.
Okay, getting to the end, Shane, a couple of small points. Do you have a political or economic hero whom you'd like to emulate, maybe?
Oh, okay. Well, I certainly.
You.
Okay, well, it's not necessarily a New Zealander, but my favorite president was President Clinton. And of the Aussie prime ministers, neck and neck is Bob Hawke and Keating.
Okay, what's so great about Clinton?
I must confess there were certain lapses of judgment, but I just loved the way. And I happened to be, I think, in Seattle when he had one of his conventions there. And I did study in the United States of America in 1990 and 91, I think, and came home in 92. I love both the style and the way in which Clinton brought a level of charm and character to his role. And he got knocked over and he stood up again. And I think he encapsulated it all when he said it's the economy, stupid.
Okay. What do you consider your greatest achievement so far?
Well, they say in Kaitaia, the kumara should never boast of its own sweetness for fear of being putting prematurely in the hangi, so I'll be a little bit careful what I say there. But I'd have to say, mate, being the steward of the Provincial Growth Fund, if you ask me about recent political political sort of responsibilities that I've had. And that involved effecting some long-term legacy-orientated changes to the economy at a local level, whether it was water storage, the development of the Apotiki wharf, the rollout of a host of other tourism and development initiatives throughout the South Island and virtually every region in New Zealand.
Okay, and this really is the last question, and we've canvassed it a bit already, but what's the thing you would most like to achieve should you get back into cabinet, should you get back into government?
Well, in the event that we're back in government, number one, I'm going to bring some common sense and balance to the hysteria around climate change. Number two, I genuinely want to be involved in using the levers to boost growth in New Zealand. And thirdly, I obviously, with my Maori background, am highly driven to reduce the disparities between my young people and other Kiwis as a contribution to growing the overarching nation in an integrated, indivisible way.
Shane Jones, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
What a mate.